According to the 2022 Data Breach Investigations Report, the human remains the number one driver of breaches today, demonstrating that cybersecurity is no longer just a technical challenge, but a human one as well. But how do you manage the human risks of cybersecurity? It starts with measurement. Only by effectively quantifying human risk can organizations engage employees with relevant activities to truly change human behavior. That's human risk management. Map key human behaviors to the business risks that matter most to your organization for free by visiting securityweekly.com/living security. Files are the lifeblood of business, and your employees will open the files they need to do their jobs, whether they're safe or not. With Votiro, your employees will only open files that are safe. Votiro applies zero trust principles to files and sanitizes every incoming file for your organization. Known and unknown threats are removed instantly, and the file retains full functionality, so your business is safe and productivity never slows down. And it's not just for email. The Votiro Cloud API works on web downloads, file uploads, cloud apps, FTP, and content collaboration portals. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Votiro. Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Tyler Robinson and Josh Marpet. As a member of the Security Weekly community, we are pleased to offer you 20% off your InfoSec World 2023 tickets. Join a community of over 2,000 security professionals and innovators at InfoSec World on September 25th through the 27th at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort. Experience world-class learning and networking through enlightening keynotes, informative panel discussions, interactive breakout sessions, hands-on workshops, and more. Register today at securityweekly.com/InfoSec World 2023 using code ISW23-SecWeek20. All right, gentlemen, articles for this week. As you guys know, I always start with kind of my leadership and CISOs work, and then we kind of work our way over to communications, which is at the end. And there's a couple interesting kind of CISO board discussion of items here to cover first. This first one really kind of focuses on aspects of the CISO, the communications with the board, the importance of cybersecurity, right? There is a lot more focus on cybersecurity now, which I think is good, but it's also in the crosshairs of the SEC and some of the other regulators now, where we're looking at some mandatory kind of cybersecurity reporting or expertise on the board. So it's kind of an interesting article to start with, because we're seeing more from a regulatory perspective around cybersecurity in the board.
Yeah, it is interesting that, this goes all back to our first segment, and a lot of what they're saying here is really evaluating and making sure we have clear communication paths on the board, that the board understands what the risks are to the business, and ensuring that the security does not come across as a cost center. Really, in order to have a successful culture of security, you really have to identify and show the business why security has its return on investments. And to be able to do that, you have to be able to measure the hard things, and that's measuring the quantitative and qualitative aspects of what security is. Those metrics aren't easy to collect, but again, like our last segment, in order to do that and to be effective, it really starts at the board and being able to articulate that well to them through good communication and good relationships.
You have to be able to articulate, communicate. You have to be able to explain it in language that they can understand and put it in words and definitions that they can understand. If you can explain to them why security, why a flat network matters, why FTP should be destroyed and caught on fire, if you can explain to them the reasons behind this, the context, then you're doing your job. If you can't, then you best go take a course in soft skills.
Well, this article says it right there. You really need to make sure that we have at least some level of technical competency on the board, providing guidance and understanding around cybersecurity. These new regulations, again, I think are fantastic, and I think more companies need or should be proactively looking for people that have a technical and security background on their board, so that the board gets a fair shot at understanding and being able to make good and clear decisions that affect the business with security in mind. without some of that background, it's very difficult to discern, even if they're trying to do the right thing, it's very difficult to discern what is good and what is not good from a board level, and what is being presented to them as a metric. It's not easy to do even for people that are in security. So I think making sure you have good security people on your board is very useful.
Yeah, I think the interesting one that ties into the next article is credit ratings. If your credit rating goes down, your borrowing costs go up. That has a major impact on the business, right?
Yep.
Now, I'm not saying that's the only metric or the only one that matters, but if credit ratings are now using your cybersecurity posture and whether you've had a breach to adjust your overall ratings, it's going to affect borrowing rates, which in this climate are a little crazy, right? Like as the inflation's going up, we're adjusting interest rates, and now credit ratings are causing you maybe to have to borrow at a higher rate. That has a huge potential impact to the business as well.
Well, how many people didn't buy a house because the mortgage rates are so high? How many businesses, because of similar reasons, aren't performing capital improvements on their business? They're not hiring people. They're not buying equipment. They're not buying the tools. They're not upgrading their software.
Well, that goes back to that. It's very difficult to do, right? If you want to prove the metric, you have to measure that metric, and that metric is very difficult. If you want to show and not have layoffs and you need the resources, take the time to evaluate and look at security as something other than a cost center. You can actually recoup that, show your return on investment by maintaining good cybersecurity so that the credit ratings are there, you're not doing the layoffs, and that's a cyclical process. You can't just magically go back and not have a breach, right? You have to proactively show those metrics and show the value of having good security that long-term provides feedback into the business units.
Absolutely. Which ties into the next article, because I love to string these together, how the CISO can actually go get budgets. So Josh, to your point, you're not spending money on software and hardware and upgrades because your budgets got frozen or cut. This article talks about aspects of how to better position security with the CFO to actually go get some of those budgets for some of this. Because if you're articulating the risks correctly to the business and you identify gaps, then working closely with the CFO to go get budgets to close those gaps actually could be a benefit. But how do you do that effectively?
Well, when you can communicate to the CFO that we can spend $50,000 on this, or we can have this risk of a $5 million loss. Okay, so it's $50,000 or a $5 million loss. Are you guaranteeing that loss is going to happen? No. But it's pretty likely based on the news that we see today. Okay, CFOs understand that kind of concept. You give them the options and you tell them, here are the choices. We can spend this rather negligible amount of money comparatively or have this major loss. Okay, and if you can explain the risk of that loss to them in a way that they can understand, there's about a 40% chance it'll happen in the next 3 years. We're not upgrading. Therefore, our risk goes higher and our liability goes higher because our cyber insurance is going to lapse because we're not updating things on a regular basis, blah, blah, blah. When you can explain it in such a way that a CFO who deals in contracts every day, who deals in dollars and percentages every day, understands, guess what? You'll get the budget you need. And anything that they don't give you, you have explained and explicitly given them the option, takes it off your shoulders.
Well, that goes back to communication. This requires proactive, preemptive relationship establishment, and you need to be able to communicate that and communicate it in their language, which requires you to be an emotionally intelligent person to read a room, be able to. In fact, this has a great tip about doing the negotiations. You have to be flexible. You have to understand this is a business, and there are other things outside of the siloed blinder security vertical that we all think in. Like, why don't you just give us money? Because security is important. Well, yeah, security is important, but also payroll is important. Also, benefits are important. Also, keeping the lights on in building is important. So we have to not silo ourselves, have that emotional intelligence to communicate and come to the table and negotiate as a group. That negotiation as a group provides an open platform for communication so that you can actually bring alternatives. Come prepared to negotiate that, lose things, and then have backup plans and alternatives set out so that you can provide other options that are still in the security stance and still working towards the betterment of the
and
business.
I think the other thing I took away from that negotiate as a group is you have to tie security initiatives to business initiatives. You have to understand what are the key business initiatives that the organization's trying to do.
Yes.
And then identify where security would actually benefit that business initiative, because now you can tie budget dollars for the security initiatives tied to that business initiative, right? That means good communication and understanding what the business is driving. But that's another way to negotiate as a whole, to say, look, if this is the highest business initiative for us, here's the potential risks. Here's what we can do from a security perspective to reduce those risks so that project succeeds. Now I can get some budget. I may not get it all, but at least I can make sure certain business goals and objectives are being met.
Yep, that's working with those business units. Getting creative around a lot of this. There's a lot of initiatives. You want to lower your time to contract and procurement, and to do that more effectively so that you have bigger or faster clients or different client verticals. Well, get lower cyber insurance, ensure that the procurement department has everything they need to negotiate the contracts, and you're becoming an enabler. Now you're establishing those relationships, and you're getting the credit for things that usually are seen as roadblocks. Rather than do that, find ways to think about things differently. Don't think of them in the same way. Cyber insurance is a great example of that. Provide that as a benefit. We can lower our cyber insurance in order to get more contracts, to get procurement faster, to have a better supply pipeline. Like, you've got to think a little bit differently and stop thinking in the no terms and bring it around back to the business.
Absolutely. Next article. This is a presentation that's going to be at RSA. It's called "The Emperor Has No Clothes." It's an awesome title. And in the article, he actually describes why he believes that the CISO, although considered a C-level executive, is not really viewed by most organizations as a C-level executive, because they're not listed anywhere as a C-level executive on the leadership team of the website. And so it just goes back to this conversation we had last week a little bit with Jeff Pollard on why it's so important for the CISO to report into the CEO. This is just another take. Like, if the CISO is a C-level position, then why aren't they on the leadership page of the website for most of these public companies?
Yeah, that's a scary statistic, looking at this and thinking about today's viability for any major company, your viability, your entire revenue stream, in fact, your entire protection of customer data that's going to keep you from burning down a brand, relies very heavily on the CISO, and he does not have executive authority in any way, shape, or form with a good path forward of leadership. That's a huge problem. Like, how is this a problem? Do we just take a letter off the CISO and make it a 3-letter acronym so he's an executive now? Like, I don't know what's going on. This is really scary.
This is a problem because it's the CEO, but below the CEO, there is the CISO, the CIO, the CTO, and nobody's quite sure of where they all stand in relation to each other. Okay? And that's the problem. It's because, is the CIO run the CISO and the CTO? Is that the way it goes? In which case, the CTO and the CISO should be directors or senior managers or managing director, something like that, right? They shouldn't be C-levels if they're reporting to another C-level like that. It just shouldn't work that way. All right. So it's wrong. It's wrongly configured as it stands, and that's the problem. Now, in my opinion, the CISO should not be a C-level person. The CISO should be at what's just below C-level? Director? VP?
Some call it VP or senior vice
CISO
president.
should be a VP. EVP, SVP, something like that. Okay, let's call it SVP, just below C level. Does that sound good? All right. A CISO should be the SVP of Security. Why? Because their job should be, here are your choices. You make a pick. There's a risk and a risk. You choose which risk you want. Not my problem.
Yep. The choice should not. He's bringing the analysis, the data. He should not be the one making the executive decision.
That should be at the CEO level, maybe the CIO level. I don't know, but like that, the person who makes that decision should be the one with the C title. Yes.
However, here's the exacerbated problem here with this. You look at the Sullivan case, right? Now he's not the one making all of the decisions, but guess what? The liability is now falling to him, or has fallen to him in the past. That even when he's not able to make the decisions, he's just bringing the data. The liability and the scapegoat mentality has been.
That's why CISOs still have a C in their name, in their title, but they shouldn't, because they're the designated scapegoat. CISOs should not have a C level. They should not be C level. They are because they're the scapegoat. They are because they're the one that gets kicked out. And here, whack, there's your liability. Have a nice day. Pick up your desk.
But that should be very clear, because they don't have the authority to make a decision. Again, this is like Matt's talked very heavily about this, and the order and who you report to should matter, but still who you report to, you look at the precedent that's been set, that there's no good solution here, I think, until something is established that makes a single tier that is straight up to the very top. Like someone has to.
The solution is we don't put the person with no authority the responsibility and the liability. But nobody wants to take that responsibility and that liability back to where it belongs, which is the CEO. Okay? The person who makes the decision has the liability. If you're given good information, if the SVP of Security has given you proper information about the risk, however many choices there are. Now, if they've screwed that up, that's on them. Let's be clear. Okay, but if they've given you proper information, here is your risk and here's your risk, and you're like, I want that one. Okay, if you say that, we can do it. But here's what the potential consequences, bad and good, are. Are you okay with that? Sign here if yes. I signed my hot little John Hancock there. Guess what? That's on me. But until that happens, they're going to have a C-level title, and they're going to be the designated scapegoat.
So you know how we fixed this on the financial side with Enron, right? It was called Sarbanes-Oxley. And the CEO and the CFO had to sign off on the financial attestation. The only way to solve this, Josh, to your point, is that the CISO and the CEO should be signing off on risks of the business that they're willing to accept or somehow have to disclose, right? That's the only way to truly solve some of this, is that the CEO takes responsibility like he had to from all the financial reporting side as well.
I agree entirely. So the CEO takes the responsibility for the decisions, and the CISO, or the SVP of Security, takes responsibility for preparing the option choices. Do you know what I'm saying? For those decisions to be made. And that's a legitimate thing to ask for, and a legitimate thing to put responsibility on those two parties. And when we do that, we will have a way that SVPs of Security, if they screw up the options, if they screw up the risk calculations, that's on them. I'm okay with that. But if the decision made was bad and wrong and inappropriate and negligent, then it's the CEO's fault, and that's the one who should pay the price. But of course, we can't do that. CEOs should never pay prices. I think that's bullshit. Sorry.
No, but we've seen it, so you are right. And that kind of leads into this leadership article, right? Because the graphic in here is actually the C-suite's who's who overview. And guess who's sitting up there near the top? This chief information officer or chief technology officer. Back to your point, the CISO is not listed here. An operating officer, right? In the information officer and the technology officer, but the security officer is not listed here. So again, back to this point, is it really a C-suite of title? Is it
No.
really the structure or not?
In some companies, it is. In some companies, it is. And don't get me wrong, but that's dependent on the specific company. In most companies that I've seen, it is absolutely not a C-level gig. Why? There is not an operational area of the company that rolls up to them. There is a support area of the company that rolls up to them. Okay? And an operational area of the company where there are decisions that can be made that can affect the company's future roll up to a C title, which rolls up to the CEO. Make sense? Okay. A support area of the company, is there a CIT person? Chief IT officer? A CISO? No, there isn't. Why? It's a support area of the company. Is there a chief office supplies officer? Or whatever. No, that's a support area of the company. That is a services area, shared services area. Security is nothing more than a shared services area. And I'm not denigrating it in any way, shape, or form. It's valuable, it's useful, it's needed, it's wonderful. But it is a shared services area. It does not go to a C-level. I'm sorry if I offended anybody. I didn't mean to, but that's my belief.
Now, this article is really, really good. It covers a huge swath of everything Jason always says, everything Matt always says. It goes into great detail on what types of leaders there are, what types of management there are, and the difference between leaders and the servant leaders and different transactional leaders. Goes into what you need to be a good leader, effective leader. The honesty, the teamwork, the servanthood. All those things are very well laid out in this, along with resources. Honestly, this is one of the more comprehensive articles if you're trying to evaluate from a qualitative standpoint of where you sit as a leader, what type of leader you are, and ways to improve that moving forward. All of those things kind of fall into that.
I think self-awareness is important, Josh, back to your point, right? If I'm in an organization and I hold the CISO title, but I really don't have the authority to affect change or to make decisions, am I really in the right role? Am I at the right organization as a leader, right? I mean, that's a self-awareness question that I think a lot of people have to just kind of step back and say, is this for me? Like, do I have leadership authority here? Because if I don't, maybe I'm in the wrong place. So what I like about this article is it actually helps you kind of measure yourself to kind of get to the point you were making a little bit. Like in some organizations, you're just a supporting role. You may not be the final authority, and that's okay if that's what you want. But if you want more of an authoritative role, then you better understand that the organizational structure is either going to support you or not support you in that desire.
That's very, very true, sir. Very, very true. Well said.
All right. Last article for this week is building effective and skilled teams through networking, unique connectivity, and communication. I love this article because I think it's a challenge for a lot of organizations to figure out the team dynamics, right? I'll take just Living Security as an example. We're remote first. A big chunk of the team's in Austin. I live up outside of Fort Worth. You've got team members around the country. This is a challenge, right? In these dynamics, like how do you continue to build effective teams? So we do a lot to try to figure this out as a company, right? So every quarter we do an all hands. Everybody comes to Austin, right? Because we want to get that team together, work face to face, because we don't get to do that every single day, right? Then what other ways do you use networking and other activities to really keep people engaged and to keep that team strong, right? So this article talks about some of the different things you can do to continue to build that team up, because I think it's so critical when you're in kind of a more remote first environment and your team's spread out literally all over the country.
Yeah, this was exacerbated during the pandemic, and we've seen kind of that shift back where, well, I think the remote work and everybody having that kind of flexibility is very important. We also seen a lot of siloing. We've seen a lot of loneliness. I mean, even in the security community, we all want to go to a conference. We all miss hugging our friends and seeing it. As nice as it is to be home and not traveling all the time, there are downsides in that. It's very difficult for people to reconnect and do this. And I think a lot of companies have great intentions to make this good and to try and do this well. Even the leaders, try and do social hours, try and schedule meetings where all the team gets together and just chats through things. Like, all those are great. We run into issues where that just seems like another meeting. We end up on calls. People don't really engage because it's not organic like it normally would be in person. So these are very big challenges. And I think some of the ones in here are really good around the passion projects. Google's got that one right. I think working together on projects that interest both people and you are provided time to do that. That's a great way to do that organically without forcing people to do, social things that maybe don't make them feel comfortable. They don't like cameras. Like, all these things are important and necessary to maintain culture and team dynamics, but doing that well and doing that right takes some very, very open and honest relationship conversations from leaders to inside the groups, because not everybody's going to speak up, especially the ones that don't like it.
Yeah, that is so true. Yeah, it's a challenge for everybody. We face it ourselves. I think everybody faces it these days. And, these are hopefully tips and tricks that will help everybody keep their team happy and engaged and growing. Because what we don't want is to lose really good skilled resources in an industry where we really struggle to get really good skilled resources. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. Thank you everyone Thank you everyone for watching and listening. Next week is episode 300. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.